appreciate everybody taking time. Really looking forward to a great conversation. I'm going to kick things off just by giving a little background on who Mayfield is as people get logged in. Many of you know us as an early stage venture firm. As you probably know, we've been around a super long time relative to the venture world. We're one of the very first. We're on our 20th fund. We've done about 600 investments over the course of the firm since 1969. Some major logos that we've been fortunate to be part of, incubating these companies, something we call inception stage investing. So working with companies even before they have product during that early design phase, that early product market fit and discovery process. This is a snapshot of some of the companies in the portfolio. In total, there's about 70 companies in our current portfolio. We're looking at about 7,000 or 8,000 business plans throughout the course of the year and invest in about 1 or 2 new deals every month. These are the 3 primary sectors as we define them that we're investing in, with check sizes between $500,000 and about 12 million for either seed or Series A. It's a very interesting time to be investing. Over the past couple of years, we've watched valuations get a little out of control. They're coming back to more normal numbers now. So expectations both on the private side and the public side on valuations are normalizing a bit. For us, this is a great time to be an investor, to have capital to deploy. The enterprise market is going through a whole sea change of cloud first infrastructure and new management applications around automation. So SaaS applications, core infrastructure, cybersecurity, and RISC-V as an open source platform for new semiconductor infrastructure. Consumers going through a whole change in how consumers are buying, marketplaces, neobanking, new social concepts. And then finally, engineering biology, both human health and planet health. Huge opportunities around precision medicine, precision outcomes around therapeutics, drugs, diagnostics, and of course, climate change, new carbon, new proteins, and new science around methane and other carbon sequestration models are part of our thesis. So today, we're going to spend time with 3 amazing experts, and I'm so pleased to have you all here today. This started with a conversation with my good friend, Scott. It looks like we've misspelt your name, Scott. Sorry about that.
No, you got it right.
Oh, got it right. Good. Scott has been leading as CTO inside of Deloitte for some time and has recently taken over the role as a global lead for quantum computing. Just a fascinating opportunity. And he, together with 2 of his buddies here, who I think you guys are on the speaking tour all around the globe, it seems, these days, are coming together as sort of a band here, if you will, to share with us some insights. We're going to lead with Scott, and then Will, also known as Worley, is going to give us an update from his perspective, and then Aparna from IBM will share some insights, and then we'll have a fair amount of time to open for questions. So eager to hear questions from the audience. I'll open up the chat. You can type your questions here in the chat bar and go from there. So Scott, why don't we kick it off with you and just tell me when you want to fast forward through your slides and take it away.
Okay. Thanks, Camille. It's great to be here. It's always fun to get to talk about quantum computing with Will and Aparna and talk about it anyway. Maybe if we go forward 1 slide, I'll just say quickly, I think most of you are probably aware Deloitte is actually the world's largest professional services firm. I should probably start with that. We do somewhere between $50 and $60 billion of revenue every year. We serve everybody all around the globe, and we do a lot of work in technology. So we have grown far beyond being an audit firm, which is why when quantum computers started coming about, we decided that we needed to figure out what did it mean for our customers and our clients here in the US and around the globe. To us, quantum computing represents a different method of computation. So if you think about it, all of the computers that we use today are really just using math really fast. This Zoom call is enabled by a lot of really quick math going on behind the scenes. And what we're starting to find is that we're reaching the end of what we can do, or at least we can project or foresee the end of what we can do with just math. And so quantum computing actually represents the opportunity to think about how we can use physics to solve problems, how we can use quantum mechanics to solve problems, how we can envision doing things differently as we move forward. And I'm going to tell you or try to give you an analogy for how to think about how solving a problem with physics might be different than solving a problem with math. I'm going to use soap film and soap bubbles as an analogy, so stay with me. But part of the reason for doing that is what I want you to understand is this is really quite different than the way we do things today. And it's important because what we believe is that over the next couple and next several years, what we're going to increasingly see is capability, increasingly powerful calculations and quantum things. And basically, what's important is for people to start thinking about where might this be useful for us? How might it be useful? And my goal is to give you a few ways of thinking about use cases, a few ways of thinking about analogies and other things so that you understand both why this is different, where it might be applied to your business and your problems, and how to think about where to go from here. So with that, why don't we actually go forward one, Camille? Turns out there is a classic problem in mathematics. For those who care, it's called the Steiner tree problem. But the idea is basically if I give you an arbitrary number of cities or points, or I give you a circuit board, how do you connect all of those points together with the minimum amount of material? So it turns out these 4 cities are actually almost form a square within Europe. And if you thought about what you think that shortest bit of material might be, the shortest amount of road to connect these 4 cities, chances are your intuition is probably wrong. I'll show you the answer in just a second, but it turns out this is a classic problem in math. There's a huge amount of math you can actually do to get to the answer. The right answer, if you can roll forward one, Camille, is actually this. It turns out that it is 5 equally distant segments, all connected together in this non-intuitive fashion. You can actually solve this problem in one of 2 ways. You can solve this problem with a whole lot of math, or you can actually do this with a children's setup. You can take a board, you can stick 4 nails into it, take a bucket of soapy water, turn the board upside down, pull it out, and the soap film will show you this exact answer. And if you don't believe me, there are great YouTube videos that show you this. So if you roll forward one, this is really, if you think about it, it's a little bit about using physics to solve a problem instead of math. Physics gives us the answer almost instantaneously. The challenge with using physics to solve a problem we would usually use math for is actually how do you formulate the problem in a way that physics is able to solve it? And it turns out that that's really, if you think about it, what's going on with a quantum computer and really what's hard about them. The thing that we're all trying to figure out today is how do I formulate the problem? How do I put the nails in the board and think of using soap film in order to solve my problems quickly, expeditiously, and so forth? So this is the promise. If we can formulate our problem for the physics, we can get an answer almost instantaneously. Otherwise, we can do lots and lots of math. So if we go forward one, when we think about what we might use these physics problems for, right? How we might use quantum computers in the future, there are 4 big categories of places that people are currently looking. The first one is this idea of optimization and analytics, Monte Carlo analysis. There are a list of different opportunities here, but this is really how do we optimize, take things that we do today and potentially do them better. Operations research, logistics, routing, scheduling, and so forth. The second class is this idea of artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're starting to see evidence today that quantum computers can train more effectively with less data on machine learning models than our classical computers. So as we figure out how do we increasingly scale the capabilities and other things, what sorts of new things will we be able to do there? The third, chemicals and material science. This is why quantum computers were originally postulated and invented. It was an idea by Richard Feynman that if you could use atoms to simulate other atoms, that will work much better than using math. And what people are trying to do today is figure out how can we use all of this capability to be able to predict physical motion and chemicals and other sorts of things, to predict chemical reactions, to engineer better catalysts and better drugs and other things. And so lots of work is going on there that's really interesting. And then last, but certainly not least, is this idea of security. Professor Shor, a number of years ago, came up with the idea that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer, which does not exist today and is probably not on the short-term horizon, could actually break all of our existing encryption. And so as we think about that and we look at that problem and come up with solutions, what does that mean? How should we be thinking about it? How should we be planning for it? Lots of interesting things going on in this space. The thing that I'll tell you if we go forward one slide is today, there's actually narrow quantum advantage that you can find in the area of optimization. So depending on where you're looking or what sorts of problems you have, there's evidence, and we have demonstrated that you can actually do better logistics and routing. You can do better feature selection for machine learning algorithms. You can do a number that weren't possible even a few years ago. And so as we look at the space where quantum advantage exists, we expect that although it's narrow today, it will continue to grow over time. And the thing to keep in mind is we have 60 years of classical techniques behind us where we've optimized math. It turns out that physics can do a little bit better today. So stay tuned to see how much better we'll be able to figure out how to make physics do in the future. So this leads people to ask, when and how should we get started? So there are two flavors of quantum computers that exist today. There are what's called annealers. They're simpler machines that are designed for optimization. And that's where, as I said, we're seeing advantage today. That's where things are working today. You can put smaller problems into these. They can give you really interesting answers. Then we have this idea of these general purpose computers. They're the ones that Aparna and IBM are working on, that are the really fascinating technology. That's the promise that everybody's working for. They're a lot harder to build. And so they're somewhere in the future. If we think about how long it can take 6 to 12 months to take somebody who's smart today and retrain them to use an annealer. I think what we're finding is it takes 12 to 24 months to retrain somebody to actually start to better understand how to use the gate-based machines. They're just more complex. It's a harder problem. And so you're going to hear from Aparna what IBM's roadmap looks like in terms of when these things might show up available for a theater near you. What I think, though, is that we're starting to see cases where there's reason to look at these technologies today. Given the amount of time it takes for people to get ready, to get up to speed, we believe that it's important for people to start planning for that eventuality in the future. And I would simply say that we at Deloitte, as well as a number of other organizations, are more than happy to help you think about how to get started and think about, where to go and what to think about from here. So I think, Gamil, if we can go forward one, now the question that I think everybody should be asking is, a little bit more of now what do we do? Again, my advice is if you are curious, there are plenty of resources. There are a number of them that are freely available on the internet. I would say if you wind up being curious, it's a good time to start learning more. So with that, Will, over to you.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, Will, appreciate you being here. So give us a little background on you. You've been on the speaking tour, as I mentioned at the outset. So you've got all kinds of stories. You've written books and all kinds of things. So
Yes, yes. So we've done a lot of stuff. Obviously, the thing you're referencing is quantum computing for babies, so actually a great primer. The approach I want to take today, when I think about executive briefings, I often look at it kind of multinodal. So, where are we at in the evolution of the industry? Scott gave a great overview about what these computers are useful for and why there's such a big difference. I look at this as the biggest paradigm shift in computing since the beginning of computing, right? It's the first step away from von Neumann architectures. It's very different. But if I think about it from the aspect of a CTO or a CIO, I think about how do I fund and find this? Like, what is the future of research computing look like? Where does this fall into my organization? And so I thought what I'd do is talk a little bit about kind of where the funding has went. We started this company in 2018 and we launched, and there was about $20 billion that had invested in quantum computing worldwide by governments and PE firms and venture capital. Well, since 2018, that number's increased to over $30 billion. So if you think about that, we'll turn 5 in March. And so that means over 5 years, an additional 10 to 12 to $15 billion will be invested in this space. The big question, of course, that everybody wants to know is when is this real? And so we believe at StrangeWorks, so you kind of take the attitude of kind of this old Viking mythology, right? You say, well, pessimists say it's 20 years out, or they did back then. Now they say it's 5 to 10. The optimists say it's 3 or 4 years out. To now 1 to 3, and the realists are preparing today. Scott just told you that if you're going to get somebody prepared to do this in your organization, it could take a minimum of 6 to 12 months, 12 to 24 months, just to get them to proficiency. And it's moving sands, right? This technology is evolving so much, every day that is changing. So if you see your organization wanting to do quantum computing in the next 5 years, you should probably already have a few people working with people like Scott on machines like what Perna and IBM provide to be moving things forward. So, back to kind of where that financing picture is, I think about it. I think people do their research and they say, okay, Scientific America had an article on April 1st, 1994 that said quantum computers are creeping closer to reality. And then, on September 16th of 2011, IEEE Spectrum had an article entitled Practical Quantum Computers Creep Closer to Reality. And then of course, in April of this year, Harvard Business Review said, making quantum computing a reality. And so I can understand when you go and you Google it and you listen to pessimists, where you could get confused. But when we first started, IBM had 17 qubits, and I don't want to take away from Aparna's roadmap, but they have hundreds now, and we'll have thousands very soon. So the acceleration curve, if you think about it from versus classical computing, it's drastically different, and that includes in the funding. In 2000 to 2013, there wasn't a lot of funding over those 13 years in quantum, but in 2014 and 2015. There was a 4x increase, 15 private companies, 40 different equity rounds. And that led to where we are today, because last year in 2021, there was over 3.2 billion invested by venture and private equity in quantum computing startups. Okay. $1 billion of that in the last quarter of last year. And we hit almost $1 billion of investment this year. So it's really, really interesting. We started, there were no publicly traded companies. Now Rigetti is public. D-Wave is public, IonQ is public, Quantum Computing Inc. is public. So this is something that is now a regular topic on your CNBC and your financial broadcast. But again, bring it down. Is it the time to invest? Sure. How do you determine what that investment is? We still don't have any stellar use cases. Scott told you everywhere that it could be used, and some of those you can do today. Some of those are tomorrow kind of thoughts. I see that somebody threw in, I'm just going to riff off this. What drove the step change investments in 2014? It was some practical breakthroughs in the physics underlying these machines. And that's a really good time to mention that, the reason I'm so excited about quantum computing, the reason I think this is the greatest time to be alive in computing history, is that unlike classical computers, the quantum computers, you get to a few hundred qubits like Aparna has, you can start using those qubits to solve some of the fundamental physics problems. And so again, the ramp is going to look more like a step function than this kind of gradual increase. I like to say 2023 looks like 1963. So in 1959, Jack Kilby invented the integrated circuit. By 63, it had kind of started getting sort of popular, but was still a little experimental. And then all of these things led to kind of modern computers and that we're talking on today that we use every day with our phones, et cetera, et cetera. Well, 2023 to me based on where I see IBM's roadmap and others where I see the development of university programs, et cetera, that looks a lot like 1963. And I think that is super, super important in the grand scheme of things. Again, for point of comparison, I've been doing advanced technologies for 30 years. I've never seen such a drastic increase in things. When we started, there was a handful of software and hardware quantum computing startups. There are now over 800 worldwide, 229 that we track at Strangeworks on a weekly basis. There were 4 master degree programs in quantum technologies. There's now 37. We talked about the investment. There were also tons of new patents, tons of new technologies. This is a really interesting time because I believe that as an enterprise, if you haven't already started on that path that Scott suggested, again, using machines like you can have available today at IBM, it's not like you can't get access to this technology, right? There's tons of ways to access it. I believe that you're going to be too late. I think in the prep time that you need to get a team set up, the competition for talent that's going to fall upon CIOs and CTOs moving forward, it becomes a really, really interesting and very competitive time to be moving yourself into a technology that I don't think it's a gradual increase. I don't think it's like, oh, we can do better financial trades or we can do better chemistry research or drug discovery. I think it's, oh, somebody has a quantum computer and you don't, and now they're the new kind of king of the hill. And if you want to think about that, put it in perspective, look at the national and international programs around quantum computing. China has invested over $15 billion over the last 20 years in quantum computing. The US is investing $1.5 billion in the Trump administration, hopefully tens of billions in the Biden administration with some of the new acts that have come through. Sweden, $1.5 billion program. Korea has a program. France has a program. Germany has $2 billion. So why are they doing this? Because they see the reality of quantum computing. Scott mentioned Shor and Shor's algorithm and the breaking of encryption. This is something they see as a national security issue, not being the first to have quantum. And so, the disconnect I see between government and industry is that while industry usually leads and government's slow to react, the governments actually see the importance of this and the dramatic step function that's going to happen with this technology being introduced to the world. And the industry's still like, I talked to a friend and they said it's going to be 30 years out and I'll just take my time. And I think that is, the main point I'd like to make is if that is your attitude towards this, you're going to lose in the next kind of computational race. And with that, I will turn it over to Aparna.
Great. Thanks, Worley. Aparna, welcome and thrilled to have you here. Just tell me when you're ready to push through the slides.
I am ready and thrilled to be here as well. I think
Great.
What I'm going to talk about is more of a technology provider outlook on this, especially given that Scott and Worley have already put the nice foundation which I can build up on, and a little bit of a history lesson to begin with. If you go to the next one, in May 2016, we actually did something very different. We decided that we needed to get quantum in hands of everybody. So we actually put the first 5 qubit machines out there in public for everybody to use and touch. Then in May, next one, in 2017, we said, okay, we are already seeing a lot of traction and we need to get people who are working on quantum together and create this quantum network. And today we have about 119 members in that quantum network, and we've reached about 3.9 million learners who are using quantum. The numbers kind of speak for itself in this next slide, which you see, which is we have, since May 2016, we now have around 410,000 users, 190 network members, and 3.5 billion daily executions, which are happening over our 20 plus systems, a fleet of 20 plus systems. So from day one for us at IBM, it's all been about adoption. How do we make sure that this technology, which we are building, has enough people working on it, is democratized, and has the community engaged? And you can actually see this from the next graph, which shows an exponential growth for us. Think about this. over the lifetime, we've had 1.3 trillion lifetime execution on IBM quantum systems. We've come a really long way from May 2016 when we put this first time. And the way we think about quantum is we really don't think about quantum at IBM as a technology. The next slide really emphasizes how we think about it and how we are building it. We are building quantum as a strategic industry. Yes, we're creating the services, the quantum as a tool. We are enabling the research and development, but there's a whole workforce and development of workforce which goes in with. And then we are also bringing in the industry and economic development. And we are doing this by building strategic partnerships across the board, which is evident in our next slide, which shows how we've actually looked at it globally, right? We've gone and we've partnered across the board. We are partnering with startups. StrangeWorks is a big portion of who we are working with. We're working with our GSI partners. Deloitte is a partner of ours. We're thinking about how do we take this and how do we grow this broadly across the board. And this is based on one single foundation. None of this would have been possible if we were not building the technology thoughtfully. So the next slide actually shows our roadmap. And just as Worley said, when we put this out in, I believe, 2017, people looked at us and said, you guys are crazy. This is aggressive. You're never going to make this work. This is just nuts. And today, we've not only actually delivered on every single thing which we said we would, but we've also expanded our roadmap. So when you talk about quantum readiness and you start asking, is this there? The answer is yes, because today in 2024, soon we'll be talking about 433, which is, we'll be talking about it in our summit, which is in November. But you have crossed a point where simulators, you can do things with simulators. You're actually at a point where hardware is really the only way forward. And we're not just building the hardware, we're creating all the infrastructure up there. We're thinking about runtimes, we're thinking about what does serverless mean, how do you integrate it with classical workflows? Because keep this in mind, classical and quantum coexist. There's never going to be a scenario where quantum replaces classical. So our roadmap is looking at how do we intersect and how do we think about it? And the way people actually work with our roadmap, if you go to the next slide, we try to make it simple. Nothing about quantum is simple, by the way. So at least let's keep our offerings really, really simple. And we based it on 4 simple offerings. A, we really want people to use and learn and think about quantum. So there is an open plan, which is free, which you can go today and start playing around with the quantum computers. Then there's pay-as-you-go plan. For those who know exactly what you're doing, what you want to build, I would highly recommend go do pay-as-you-go. It gives you access to 27 qubits. And then there is premium plan, which is essentially the latest and greatest of the entire fleets and how the infrastructure as well as the technology which comes in it. And then the quantum accelerator. But the key over here, I love this next quote, which really talks about its partners. There are so many unknown, and I lead the partner ecosystem. It's my job to think about how to develop and how to grow this a really strong ecosystem and how to build a diverse community which is working together to really advance quantum. And we know at IBM, we cannot do it all. That's impossible. There are so many unknowns that we really need to think about how we draw those partnerships and what they do. And this next thing is really emphasizing that we have about 190 members. We have what we call hubs. We have industry partners. We have people who are doing research with us, some research members. We have about 40 plus startups. And it's actually really hard to become a startup in our network. We actually have a really hard screening process for the startups. So Worley was one of the first ones who made it into our startup network. So they are like the premier there. And then we have a whole bunch of academia. Worley, you were about to say something?
I was going to jokingly say back when it was easier before the bar got so high. We just kind of slid in there early.
Oh, we can talk about that later. But here's what I want you to take away. This is the next one. People often ask like, hey, so, okay, this is coming. What are the industries? How do I think about it? And there are many industries, right? The effect of quantum is yet to be completely recognized, but here are the top 5 industry areas we chose based on the value of use cases and the potential for quantum accelerator. And what I want you to take away in this 5 areas where we are exploring is we actually have enterprise clients who are actually working with us and exploring what this means. Financial services is getting a lot of traction. We've been doing some really nice job with Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, HSBC, etc. And I think the idea which I want you to take away is this is just starting. We are just scratching the surface. And there's a significant opportunity here to really explore it beyond what's possible today. And somebody wrote about Quantum Decade book. So I love that book, by the way.
Yeah.
It just talks about the fact that it's a long runway and you have to go through stages of awareness and extensive hands-on preparation to achieve that readiness. And that is why all of us, Scott, Worley, and I are saying the time is right. Get started now. Don't wait for the quantum to become mature. And you should be doing work right now on quantum and exploring it. And with that, I'll hand it back to Gamil.
Great. Aparna, thank you. There's a number of questions here, and I want to call on the audience to actually offer their questions live. So the first one was from McKenna, who was really talking about the annealers versus the gate-based platforms, and is one sort of a starting function to another in a sense? And maybe McKenna, you want to describe your question there a little bit more detail. I've opened your mic.
Yeah, and this actually relates to the BCG survey that you mentioned before, where we talk about the value added to the economy from quantum. And I'm wondering if people like Deloitte, for instance, have thought about and broken down how different technologies are going to add different value to these areas. For instance, like optimization with an annealer versus quantum amplitude estimation with a digital quantum computer. Is there any idea, like in the near term, how you think these organizations can interact?
Well, there were a couple different questions there. Let me take the easy one. I think that what we're seeing today is that because the annealers are a simpler technology to build and use, that they are the ones that are getting the most mileage today from organizations who are trying to do things in the immediate term. The universal computers that will be capable of doing much more in the future, like the ones IBM is building and many others, the challenge is that the manipulating atoms on the individual scale is so breathtakingly complex that it's taking time just to figure out how to do the physics and the engineering to actually make it all go. What's really interesting, though, when I think about this is, and I think Will alluded to this in particular, I'm not yet sure that we can imagine all the things that we will be able to do with these machines. In the same way that if this is 1963, there were very few people who had a vision of what computers might become. I would submit to you that it's going to take actually putting these things in place and people using them and trying things out and learning new things. Because if you think about where we've come since the 1960s, my suspicion is that we can't actually yet imagine what quantum computers may be able to do. I try to stay away from market sizing a little bit. My investment portfolio would indicate that I probably shouldn't be doing a ton of that. So maybe I should leave that to Will instead.
You're not alone. It's an interesting market right now. So,
well, I was going to chime in on that. I mean, that's why I started StrangeWorks. Like, I don't care about applying quantum computers to the problems of today, right? I care about exactly the point Scott just made. which is at some point there will be a general purpose quantum computer that is in the not too distant future. And at that point, think of the first computers. Nobody thought about the internet. Nobody thought about drones or autonomous cars or any of these things. So while there will be this kind of additive effect to certain verticals and markets, I'm more interested in the trillions of dollars of new markets that we can't even dream of now because we've never had this computational ability.
Yep.
So I look forward to, I think, what will it do for the economy? It will be tremendous, but it won't necessarily be in affecting current markets, but in creating completely new markets we've never even dreamed of. And that's, the whole reason we started this company. So I think it's going to have a very dramatic impact. But again, I think Scott made a great point. If you were in 1963, would you have been talking about the internet or autonomous cars or any of these things? And the chances are probably you weren't.
If I can just add, I think the thing which I would encourage to do is to think about it both from a technical and business lens. Technically, as you're thinking about these technologies, annealers or other options, you should really be thinking about what is the size of the problem. I'm giving a very technical answer, by the way, very different from these guys. And what is the compute time? Does the problem statement which you have, would it serve better with an annealer? Does it, will it diverge polynomially, etc.? In business terms, you should also be looking at, can this give you a competitive advantage in the market?
Yep.
Do you want to wait for this to happen? Is it worth it in terms of like the cost of the quantum resources as well, etc.? So I think the answer is, I know we're giving you not a straight answer because there is no straight answer to this. It depends on a lot of factors, and I think you have to think through all of those elements.
Aparna, you talked about the classical computing not going away. There was a question here from Jerry Cochran about sort of a hybrid classical versus quantum approach. Jerry, opened your mic. I don't know if you want to add to your question here, but essentially, how do we coexist here? What is that model going to look like?
Or yeah, I was just thinking, there's cloud providers that are getting quantum in the cloud. I know IBM is too, and a lot of them are saying, since it is not a reality for full quantum, let's take a classical quantum hybrid approach and let's build models that, send codes to the quantum services and send codes to classical services, and let's use the best of both worlds for a hybrid kind of modeling, whatever the application is, financial, whatever. And, I'm just curious if what the presenter's opinion on that kind of approach.
So I'll take this one and then I'll hand it over to the guys to talk through it. So I think about it as you're going to have classical quantum orchestration, for the lack of a better word, right? So when you think about your workflows, there are going to be certain things which are perfect for quantum and certain which have to be still computed classically. So if you look at IBM's roadmap, we have been building something called quantum serverless. And this whole idea is a programmer or a developer can take their workloads, divide it into classical and quantum bits, where you can send the quantum portion to the quantum computer. It can compute and then you bring it back and it kind of integrates itself. Very simplistically put, you have CPU, you have GPU, and now think about adding a paradigm like QPU with completely new workloads into that. That's how I would think about hybrid. And right now, all of us are actually building tools for that QPU, GPU, CPU world, which is coming up. Worley, Scott, anything to add there?
Yeah, I see, quantum as the next evolution of computers, but it won't just be quantum. There'll be all types of exotic computers. So maybe you have quantum and neuromorphic and amorphic, a return to some analog compute, all manners of DNA-based storage. All these things are coming. This is why CIOs and CTOs need to be preparing today. Quantum is kind of the tip of that sphere. And so it's going to help bring about other computing technologies. And so this blended kind of hybrid model won't just be classical quantum. It may be classical and quantum and something else that is already emerging or yet to be defined. We've all kind of told, the story of, Aparna just put it the best way. You want to make sure you're adequately using resources, right? So you take Shor's algorithm, it's been mentioned several times. It has 5 steps. Is it an even or odd number? Is it a factor of 2 coprimes? and you pick a random number for the calculation, only that fourth step is the non-deterministic quantum magic. So I could write you an iPhone app that would do 4 of the 5 steps so blindingly fast, it would be a waste of money and resource to do it on a quantum computer or some of these other platforms. So I think all of these things will be a hybrid model. There's a lot of things, we haven't covered, but, quantum computers don't really have a way to store data, right? There's not such thing as quantum memory. For example, which is something that, often gets overlooked. So, everything will be a hybrid model, and finding things right now today that you can take from quantum and use a quantum inspired algorithm on, say, a GPU or something like that, I think is absolutely definitely a fine way to dip your toe into that world and start, changing the way you think about your organization. I'd say it's a very good step. And for a lot of organizations, probably the right first step. But Aparna, as she mentioned, you can access pay-as-you-go very effectively a lot of these machines from IBM and others. So, even there, I think it's kind of a blended approach. Maybe you take the quantum inspired, kind of get an idea what you want to do so that you're better informed as you go and try that on a quantum computer. But eventually, you're going to want to be using these actual machines. And again, I don't think that's, 3 years away or 5 years away. I think, we have customers doing that today in pharmacy, in finance, consultative partners. So, this is something that people have kind of skipped over the, do we just play around with classical quantum inspired algorithms? Still a use case for them, but we're kind of there with the machines. You saw Aparna's roadmap, a machine of over 1,000 qubits next year. That's a real machine. That's a real device.
So I wonder if we can dive into a little bit about the cybersecurity conversation around this. And Joel at NYU brought up sort of perspective that maybe we over-indexed on crypto too early, when in fact there's opportunities for threat actors to actually leverage quantum, maybe in a egregious way. Joel, I don't know if I've opened your mic here, if you want to add to your question.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, and appreciate all the speakers' comments. This has been really insightful. But yeah, I come at it from a cybersecurity perspective. And, if you just look at how we've handled things in the past, every time we deploy a new technology, we drastically underestimate 2 things. One is all the vulnerabilities we introduce ourselves into our own environments. And then secondly, how threat actors will utilize that new technology to attack us. And so I haven't seen a lot in that space. I've seen a lot of security vendors looking at deploying quantum for their own processing and their own purposes, but just wondering if you have any thoughts on how we should be thinking about this from a cybersecurity perspective.
Well, so I'll jump in on that one. There is a very robust post-quantum cryptography community out there. A lot of work being done in that area. But I don't take such a fearful approach. I 100% agree with you. Tim Berners-Lee didn't think anybody would use email for spam, right? So, there's a million examples of, we built the technology and it's used for good or used for evil. But the reality is that security is an ever-evolving dance between threat and remediation. And it's been this way forever. At the end of there was a World War once where there was a machine called the Enigma machine, but nobody uses that to keep secrets anymore, right? Because technology advances and things move on and they get broken. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think the concept that comes to mind for most people is a quantum computer is going to come along and all encryption ends. And the reality is this: quantum computer comes along and I get your public key. And maybe Shor's algorithm works, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe you have enough qubits, or maybe you don't. And I break your key, and I have to go and repeat that. So I don't think this will be like quantum computers turn on, cybersecurity is dead. I think it'll happen at a gradual pace that is slow enough for proper responses and remediations to be put in place, and those things to be shared among communities. And if you look at the work being done at the DoD and some of the other organizations just here in the US, and I mentioned all of these other countries, like in national security, that is the #1 priority for the majority of those people, is protecting their encryption. It's not your encryption for your organization that frightens me. It's the fact that there were spies who stole secrets in the 80s about how to build an atomic bomb, and that didn't use the type of encryption we have today. Those are the things that bad actors are looking to break with quantum first. They don't really care about your bank account. They do care about nuclear secrets and other secrets that were encrypted with lesser technologies that will be easier for a quantum computer to break. And so if you look at it as far as, a kind of a stack rank of threats, it goes from there. And your bank account and like your Twitter chat or whatever is way down low on the priority list as far as actual potential harm to the world. But I would definitely encourage you to look into those communities. I know that we have talked to a number of the leading security vendors later who are doing what you said and looking at using quantum computers, but who are also starting to build out fairly robust teams looking at post-quantum cryptography.
So I'll just add to that, as you're thinking about exploring, NIST actually had kicked off a competition in 2016, and through several rounds of testing earlier this year, a month or two ago, they released a set of 4 that passed 4 rounds. Now, why do I know this? Because 3 out of 4 were put in by IBM. So that's how it's linked, right? But these algorithms are supposed to be quantum safe crypto algorithms and are based on lattice-based cryptography. So as you're thinking about like post-quantum cryptography era, I think you want to start looking and preparing yourself, in addition to what Worley was talking about, is also understanding what are the new standards, how do you actually adopt them, how do you implement them, and how do you put those standards in place well before quantum becomes viable. Because where quantum is scary is literally this notion of what Worley was talking about, save now, decrypt later kind of notion, where bad actors can kind of download that data today, and when quantum is viable, decrypt it or break the code. So you basically have to put those things in place right now, and it's very it's not quantum computing. I do want to separate it out. It's like getting ready in advance for that.
Yeah, great. There's a question here from Merrill Stone. Scott, you made a comment earlier about need to think in physics terms versus math terms, and he's asking thoughtfully, how do you make that shift? And Merrill, I don't know if you want to add to your question. I opened your mic.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to ask that question, because I think that as we're looking into quantum computing, one of the topics or one of the areas that we think really is crucial is this shift in mindset and shift in approach to problems. And when we think about things like material sciences, obviously those have a physical form. So if there are any examples you have of how organizations or people have been able to shift their mindset to think in physical ways around non-physical things in order to apply quantum computing successfully, I'd love to hear more details.
What I think we've found to be most successful is sort of the short answer to your question is finding somebody who is expert in the domain and having them actually teach and bring the rest of the team along. That's actually been the thing on our side that we've found has accelerated everybody's journey, in part because, as Will mentioned, these are not actually quantum computers. These are quantum calculators. They don't hold memory. And so it's how do I formulate a problem differently? How do I interact with the abstraction layers that have been created to date? How do I have to think a little bit differently about atomic interactions and chemical interactions and other things to make them fit into what we can do today? It's not like today you can step up to the IBM Qiskit API as a naive person and get something really useful done. You actually have to spend the time learning it. It works differently than the way most of our classical techniques work. And so it really is a shift in mindset. And part of the answer is it just takes time. And like I said, what we've found is, yes, you can go do a lot of the learning on your own. There are fabulous resources available. IBM has a ton of them. There are a ton of them on the web. There are a ton of books and other things. And the thing that really seems to make the difference is having an expert help you along the journey, because when you run into the problems and challenges, it's just helpful to have somebody who can get you out of the ruts you found yourself in.
Elevating this imaginative thinking, this solving these big problems. Harold Hughes asked a question as well. So, how do you create this new mindset in a sense? I mean, where would you begin to kind of coach an organization to think bigger, to think fundamentally different, to think about problems that have never been solved before, which we presume maybe aren't solvable. You know, I mean, you just break new log jams here in a sense.
You know, and there's one quick thing to add to that, Worley. You had said a minute ago about the uses, and you can view it as there are certain things you could solve brilliantly fast, but economically it makes no sense. And at the heart of my question is, there are a fair number of things that would be dismissed under that heuristic that actually
100%.
eventually lead to huge breakthroughs.
100%, that is true. And this is kind of the paradox, right? You have kind of overlapping Venn diagram of three types of thinkers in organizations that are looking at quantum computing, right? And then those that are looking at it from a practical standpoint, and there's the people looking at it from a visionary standpoint, and then there's the people who actually have to implement it, looking at it from a process standpoint of like, okay, that's great. How do I integrate this into my workflow, et cetera, et cetera. So your point is well taken. You're absolutely right. I do think that this is something that is falling, as I talk to organizations, into like if they have an innovation office or the office of CTO as somebody looking kind of in the future still, and not enough people looking at it, you know, in the practical implication. Calls like this don't happen enough, in my opinion. You know, certain conferences that the people on this call go to don't talk about it enough to get that kind of mindset. And I think we need a lot more community. We have several great communities, but it's a community of physicists here and developers there, and not necessarily a community of people like yourself talking about what is like, I don't want to miss the big breakthrough because I'm being cheap on this and not thinking about it. You know, this is a paradox, I think, in the people looking at the implementation of this stuff. It's going to be difficult because every organization, and we can look at classic technology organizations that are publicly traded companies, have different levels of how much risk tolerance they have and how much they're willing to innovate, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's a case for case look at an organization at what are the actual problems, what are the value of those problems. And as Scott said, the hardest thing today still is how do you scope that problem and then put it into, from this math perspective of computer science, this physics perspective of quantum computing.
I think the only thing I might add to what Will said, which I agree with, is this becomes one of those journey of 1,000 steps, right? Or 1,000 miles. The challenge is, I think people want to jump to the final answer and know what the final outcome will be. And unfortunately, in most cases, it's a journey that you have to go on. We can tell you in the abstract, what are the places to go and look for problems. And I believe that we won't collectively, until we've all started those proofs of concepts and prototypes and putting things into production, that people will actually start the wheels going of, oh, if you can do that, the thing that I never thought that we could do, I never thought of because it didn't occur to me that it was solvable, is now solvable. I think where life is going to get really interesting is when people start realizing those kinds of things can be done. And if I knew what those were, as I tell people, I would be retired on a beach, not on this call talking to all of you.
I wonder in the minutes we have left, if each of you could share, if you were a global CIO today, pick whatever industry you're in, what would you do? What tasks would you start to do now, let's say over the next 12 months, to begin to enable this imaginative thinking, the right sort of core skill set in the organization? Where would I place them? And if I had to meet with my CFO to say I need budget for this, how would I go about justifying? I mean, sort of the tactical elements of leadership from a CIO perspective. What would you start to do? And I don't know who wants to go first.
I can take that one first. So I think first thing is the CIO should start investigating those big questions. How is the business model being disrupted, reshaped? Where does the quantum actually supercharge some of the existing AI and classical workflows? What is the killer app from quantum which would be applicable in your industry? And how do you actually, and the last one probably is the most crucial, how do you start deepening your organization's capability? And once they formulate that point of view, they need to fund and nurture talent, which is fluent in quantum computing and is able to educate their internal stakeholders about possibilities and partnering with other deep tech quantum resources who can actually bring and advance their quantum thinking. And there are different ways to do that. They can start with free quantum resources, right? But then they can also start with, which is, you have a lot of that outside. IBM has a whole bunch of things, but they have to lean into the quantum ecosystem. Folks like Scott, who are actually accelerating the adoption, who are educating some of the enterprises, who are thinking about how do you take them through this journey. And I think that is what CIO needs to do. Think about the big questions, understand, build a point of view, nurture the talent, and then tap into the ecosystem and the free resources out there to start that journey.
And Aparna, you've got a number of resources at IBM. Are there any other go-to locations that you would point people to learn more or to begin this journey?
I would point them to my partner ecosystem. We have an amazing partner ecosystem. Right. So I would say, go look at that. We have a really good set of folks who are actually really good, startups who are actually building applications, GSIs who are spending a lot of time educating, universities who are building curriculum and creating students and academics who can actually become a part of your workforce. So I think that's a good example, and it is the largest quantum networks out there. So I would say start with our partners.
Yep, sounds very rich. Scott or Worley?
You can go, Will.
I was just going to say, look, this is not a problem that any CIO or CTO hasn't faced before at some point in their career. I think that for me, if I were in that position, I would allow the opportunity for people in my organization to self-select. I would start it as a side project, as a part-time thing. I wouldn't ask the CFO for budget until I had something that was a little more concrete. Yep. I would take those people and say, hey, let's take Friday afternoons or Fridays and work on the quantum stuff and learn and explore and kind of have these open discussions about it. Mm-hmm. And I would build that into using the free resources that Aparna mentioned and all of the resources out there. And I'll tell you, the biggest problem facing the CIO CTO is going to be the formulation of the problem. And that's where organizations like Scott could be helpful, where you can come in and have somebody help you that's helping a lot of people look at formulating that and right-sizing that. Mm-hmm. I don't think you need millions of dollars to get started in quantum. I think you need something that's far harder to find in most organizations and more expensive, which is time. Yeah. It is not something where you can just take a developer and make them a quantum developer overnight. You can't just take somebody who's doing material science and be like, great, just do this. Every area has different levels of difficulty and different levels of time requirements that it will take for people to get up to speed. But the one thing that I can say emphatically that I would be doing is I would be doing this now or last year or even the year before. Because again, in the 4.5 years we've been in business, went from 17 qubits to next year with Aparna, 1,000 plus, right? And after that, maybe 5 or 10,000. So the acceleration of these technologies is going to catch a number of organizations across the world off guard, be they government or enterprise.
Right.
And I think I would just say briefly, I agree with everything Will and Aparna said, which is having a vision, having hypotheses about where it will deliver value to your business or your mission and your organization, ideally outside of the technology organization. And then as Will alluded to, the good news is there are people who are already excited about quantum computing in your organization. The challenge is you probably don't know who they are yet. But I guarantee you that if you go poll the 20-somethings in your organization, some of them are already investigating and learning as their side hustle. And what you should probably aspire to is make sure you can channel that enthusiasm, not find that it disappears.
Well, I want to thank each of you, Aparna, Scott, Worley. Really appreciate you spending time with us today. And thank you all the guests for joining and attending this call today. We'll be capturing the content, sharing it around. Aparna, Scott, and Worley, if there's any content you want to include in the takeaway document, read material, whatever, we'll package that up so that everybody can get themselves educated and get rolling. To Worley's point, got to put time on your side. So get going now, I guess. So with that, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Really appreciate you spending time with us here at Mayfield and with our great speakers for today's call. Thank you all and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye all. Thank you.
Bye.